Mr. Andrei Illarionov, I'm so happy to have the chance of greeting you again in Delfi stream, because this very shaky situation in the world, and particularly the seeming dissolving of the Western coalition, this needs a experienced analyst, as you are, of course. Welcome to Delfi stream, Andrei.
Han, thank you very much for inviting me again. And I also need to say that you are not only one of the most knowledgeable persons, not only in Estonia, Europe, but in the world about the current state of both Russia and Ukraine, and the European and generally Western approach to all this area and all these problems. But you are genuinely interested in these topics, and you invested a lot of your time and a lot of your resources and resources of your colleagues together just to understand what is going on and to help Ukraine and to help Europe, not only Estonia, but the whole Europe. And by the way, to help Russia, real Russia, good Russia, democratic or Western part of Russia, I mean in just sociological and political sense of the word, as well. So that is why I really appreciate all your efforts that you have demonstrated in many interviews that you have done over the last several, not only months, but years, which became a really huge contribution to better understanding of the real problems of today.
Andrei, in this northern corner of Europe, we don't take compliments so easily. I mean,
Yes, I know that, because sometimes somebody must say something about that.
Yes, but why I'm doing this is, of course, that 3 of my 4 grandparents were arrested, taken to Russia, and died there. So I never got even to see them. So I have some strong personal motivation here. But yes, we are at the moment of mystery when we are witnessing history. And I want to raise at first point for our discussion the very strange dissolving of the Western solidarity and the coalition, as opposed to what we were thinking and what it seemed to be at the beginning of the big war in Ukraine in February 22. Namely, to my mind, maybe you agree or not, there were 2 well-prepared Western moves. One of them being the Lend-Lease Act, signed in May 22 by President Joe Biden, which would have very, very radically changed the situation for the good of Ukraine. And the second is, of course, the one sanction which was prepared by a very large coalition, and by which the foreign reserves, about 250 to 300 million of Russian Federation, were blocked in abroad. So those 2 moves were prepared. They were more or less consensus about them, and they did not happen. What a tragedy. Your comment, please.
There are many comments. The first one is the decision that has been prepared by the US Congress and US Senate to help Ukraine with Lend-Lease legislation, as we learned later, has not been taken seriously by the executive branch, by the US President Joe Biden. He has signed this document knowing fully well that he was not going to use this instrument. So that is why it was betrayal. It was betrayal not only of Ukraine, but it was a betrayal of own Congress, own Senate, own House of Representatives. Biden has signed this document knowing fully well that he is not going to execute this law of the United States Congress. It's first one.
Is it possible in the United States, the citizen of which I suppose you are, Andrei, is it possible for the president, who is, of course, a prime minister in the same person, not to commit to the act which was very clearly, almost unanimously accepted by both the Congress and the Senate of the United States? Is it possible?
As we have seen, it was possible. And as we found over the last few years, there is a lot of things possible that we never thought it was possible. It means that either something in the Western countries, in the Western institutions has changed so dramatically, or it never existed and we took it for granted that something that did not exist. I tend to believe that there is a dramatic changes in the Western institutions, in the Western psychology, and in Western ethics that happened both in Europe and the United States. And from the point of view of so-called Westerners, the most Western countries right now are not those that are in Western Europe or in the United States, but more in Central Europe, or some people would say Eastern Europe, some kind of Western countries of the Central Europe. So the Westerners, it is not geographical term. It's a term of political system, legal system, and the most important, ethical system, because ethical system is the ground, is a real basement for all other political or legal or lawful institutions that do exist. And from this point of view, number of Central European countries, Estonia among them, are also Westerners in that part of the world is much stronger now in the last years than in many other countries of the Western Europe and North America.
If we analyze the situation right after the 24th of February, 22, when the war broke out, Russian aggression broke out, it is very easy to come to the conclusion that all of those leaders of continental Europe, not England, not Prime Minister Boris Johnson, but continental Europe, specifically the biggest countries of Western Europe and US President Biden, they were just too calculative, or they were cowards, or they had some information which we since have not found out, but they were just, how to say, they were reluctant to fulfill their promises and follow their brave words. Why was it? I mean, did Putin pass some message, either just shortly before the war broke out, or later, that they very seemingly started to drag their feet? As an example, the General Secretary of NATO, Stoltenberg, as well as Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and if I'm not mistaken, President Macron immediately declared that NATO is not going to be a part of military defense of Ukraine. Why was this?
Weakness, both political weakness as well as intellectual weakness. Inability to understand the real situation in Europe, inability to understand and recognize the challenges, the threat that is being posed by current Putin's Russia, not only to Ukraine, not only to Central Europe, but the whole Europe and to the international order. And the fear that the real answer, the real response to the challenges of Putin's aggression against the world would need to use much larger resources, than they are ever able to think of. Resources of all kinds, from material, financial, budgetary, military, political, personal. Some of them, not all of them, but some of them maybe do understand they are not up to the job. And they are trying as some kind of short-term politicians, not as statesmen, trying to use this time in expectations that something will happen and somehow this problem will be resolved without their serious participation. Unfortunately, we do see all this attitude through all these 3.5 years of this large-scale war. And to some extent, this continues even with all promises and all loud statements that have been made early this year with the arrival of new US administration to the White House. Though there are a lot of statements, there are a lot of promises. So far, I have not seen much in terms of real actions, especially in terms of rearmament of Europe. We need to come back to this issue and just to say to each other and to our spectators, to our audience, this is not only Russian-Ukrainian war. This is a big European war. And to some extent, this is an already global war in which Europe, regardless whether they like or not, already participates. But many European leaders pretend and prefer not to recognize that they are being attacked. They are already participating in this war, even they are pretending that they're not. And it requires enormously more resources to react to this attack. And they prefer not to do it. Just to see how much has been changed in Russia from spring and summer year 2022, when Putin has realized that his initial plan of attack on Ukraine was a mistake, was not prepared as he expected. And he has put a Russian economy, a Russian military-industrial complex on a very different footing. And he has sacrificed not only more than 1 million people who became now military losses in this war, but he has changed the whole social life, all economic life, and now industrial production of military hardware in Russia is not only rising, but at the level that is several sizes higher than the total military hardware production of all NATO countries, meaning Europe and the United States and Canada taken together. And even those facts are known already for at least a year that has been discussed publicly. Nobody, neither in Europe nor even in the United States, do recognize those challenges. And more important, do not take decisions to respond to those challenges from Putin's Russia. Because this amount of hardware production, it is not only against Ukraine. It is against Europe. And finally, again, the United States. They prefer not to see reality.
At the same time, we are observing that the bloc of the dictatorships, like Korea, Russia, Belarus, and China, well, somewhat Turkey, but I wouldn't include Turkey into it, they are doing very well. Their cooperation is good. They are outsupplying the West. They are supplying Russia with much more ammunition and armory than the West is, although the promises of the West, they sound everywhere and very, very characteristically, very picturesque wording is being used until, or what is the wording? We support Ukraine forever it takes, or how much it takes, or
As long as
forever.
it takes.
Yes, so I haven't heard North Korean dictator Kim Il-sung saying something like this, but the ammunition and the infantry he's providing, and of course the hardware, they are impressive. Somebody has made the calculation that the overall sum has been close to $40 billion US. Nobody knows what the other side of the deal is, what would be Putin offering North Korea. There was a talk about placing Oreshnik's missiles into North Korea and Belarus simultaneously. So what do you think? Why is this? Why is Eastern Coalition not afraid to supply the aggressor, Russia, and why they seem to have more coercion and cooperation than the West?
Because they do participate in the war against the West. That war has been discussed between the leaders of those countries, definitely between leaders of Russia, North Korea, Iran, and to some extent China. China does not participate fully yet in all these efforts. And there is a big question mark what would happen if Chinese leadership would decide to join those efforts, because that would be radical change in the world geopolitics. But even before that, just let's think about the basic number that has been provided recently. South Korean intelligence reported several months ago that North Korea has given Putin at least 12 million shells of 152 calibers and higher over only 2 years, which on average 6 million shells per year. United States for 3.5 years has provided as a aid to Ukraine of artillery shells of all calibers, not only 152, but all, including much smaller, 3.5 million, which means at least not more than 1 million shells per year. So even these numbers show that North Korea, that until recently not very many people took seriously, was able to provide aggressor with 6 more times more artillery shells than United States to the victim of aggression. These calculations and these numbers attracts our attention and must attract attention of all military specialists around the world about the real balance of power, real balance of military power in this world. Until February 24th, 2022, there were many claims that Putin cannot attack Ukraine, Putin cannot attack Europe, Putin cannot attack West, because look, what is the ratio between NATO GDP and Russia's GDP? It may be 10 times more Western NATO GDP, maybe even more than 20 times. So that is why Putin has no chance to fight against the Western countries. Now, after 3.5 years of this large-scale war, we learned very hard and very unpleasant lessons. The military potential of Putin personally, of Russia, plus Putin's allies, definitely not less, but as we can see right now, larger than military potential and military resources that have been used in this war from the Western side. And this is probably the most underestimated and under-recognized very hard truths of this war. Until this fact is recognized, it is impossible to move forward. And if this situation would continue, so it is invitation of huge failure and very serious defeat, not of Ukraine, but of the whole West.
The second moment, which I'm very, very bitterly looking back to, I would say even I'm looking back in anger, is the sanction prepared prior to the war, prior to the February 22 aggression. And this was the freezing, the blocking of Putin's foreign reserves. And it was a very wide coalition. It was being done in silence, so even nobody would fear the situation to be taking the blame. And it was a coalition not only of EU and United States and NATO countries like Canada, but Japan was joining in, Norway was joining in, South Korea was joining in, and maybe most importantly, Switzerland was joining in. So it is so ridiculous, or well, I'm not in a position to issue my opinions like specialist opinions, although as a businessman I know something about foreign exchanges. But I know that the argument that euro, because European Union was part of the blocking coalition who is holding Russian foreign reserves now. Belgium is the biggest of them, of course. So any argument that euro as a currency could lose its reputation when those funds are being transferred to Ukraine without confiscating them, because no European Union country is in war with Russian Federation, the aggressor. But they could be substituted by some euro bonds. This is one of the theories. There are lots of ways to do it. As you know, as a former economic advisor of Vladimir Putin, early 2000s, advisor is, if I might say, the vegetarian Putin. So at first, I want to make my point that it was prepared before the war even broke out. And second, that they are just chickening out. I mean, it should have been transferred to Ukraine. Of course, the claim to this money for Russian Federation would have been have been maintained. You get the money after the compensation thing is being settled and the war comes to an end, and they could have, I mean, Kiev could have been purchasing any weapon, any ammunition in the world at low prices and quick production schedule. They didn't do it. Would you like to comment?
He is, as you very well aware, as well as many other people aware, the main problem is a potential legal problems with use of these frozen assets. And there was a big debate, partially open, partially behind closed doors, to what extent those resources, those assets can be used in any way. And certainly there are arguments about what to do in this particular situation. So now they found the way to use proceeds, some interests from those resources. But let me say something that would probably not would be the answer to your question straightforwardly, but it would be probably even more important, at least from my point of view. What we're talking about in this particular case, 250 billion US dollars, in the worst case, 300 billion US dollars of Russian assets. Let's look at the numbers, how much Russia spends on this war. Official numbers, according to exchange rate, last year, not this year, 150 billion US dollars. This year is going to be at least 180, maybe even 200 billion US dollars. But this is according to exchange rate. Prices in Russia is much lower than in the United States and in Europe, especially, for example, for the production of the same artillery shell of similar caliber. In Russia, it's maybe $800 each. In the United States, it's at least 6,000 or maybe even 8,000. So it will take into account all this disparity in prices. It's better to use numbers in purchasing power parity. So this 150 or 880 billion US dollars defense expenditure of Russia that was last year and this year means that by PPP, purchasing power parity, that is comparable to the European or American defense expenditures, that is, American or European aid provided to Ukraine. It must be about 400 billion US dollars. Ukraine, this is a 400 billion US dollars. This is a military expenditure on the Russian side. What is military expenditure on Ukrainian plus partners side? Ukraine spends about 50 billion US dollars. Also, because of low prices.
Yes, producing at low prices. That's what I want to say.
Right. So we need to multiply. Yeah, we need to multiply at least by 3. So it will be 150 billion US dollars in PPP prices. And we need to add all military aid that provided by the United States, Canada, European countries, other countries to Ukraine according to this level of prices. And we would find not more than 20 billion US dollars a year. So that is why we have this calculation. On one hand, on the side of aggressor, military expenditure is close to 400 billion US dollars. On the side of victim of aggressions, it's 170, maybe 180 billion US dollars. Disparity at least 2 to 1. There is no long-term war that can be won with such a ratio. So that is why, regardless how ingenuine will be or are in reality Ukrainians, how much they are ready to sacrifice themselves to defend in our own country, God loves big battalions, as Napoleon used to say. So that is why in long-term wars, it is crucial to have at least parity in military resources that have been used by both sides, just to have a chance to win long-term war, not short-term war. So that is why the crucial issue for Ukraine and for the whole Western camp is to raise level of military expenditures of all kinds, including for drone production, including anti-aircraft defense, and all others, long-term missiles, so on, to the level comparable to the Russian side, which is, once again, at today's level, $400 billion. We don't know what will be tomorrow. But for today, it is 400 billion US dollar, according to PPP. Ukraine.
But Andrei, I would like to make a clarification here for our audience. What Mr. Illarionov means by PPP is purchase price parity. So the price is taking into account the price level of the particular country. So PPP makes the equation more exact. Not every worker in every country is being paid the same salary. So sorry.
Yeah, so that is why the ability of Ukraine to raise military expenditures is limited, because Ukraine is not such a huge economy, not such a large economy like Russia or like European Union or like the United States. So that is why ability to raise military expenditure by Ukraine itself is limited. That is why the most important way to do it is just to provide aid from European or American partners to the level that will fill the gap and to reach something similar to parity with the Russian side. That is why we need to talk about the military aid to Ukraine annually at level about 200 billion US dollars, not 20 or 25 or 30 billion US dollars as real delivery to Ukraine as it was annually through these 3.5 years of the large-scale war, but at level 10 times higher than it was before. But it's only to get parity. So that is why I am trying to some kind of redirect attention from using even this, whatever, 850 or 300 billion US dollars of frozen assets from the Russian Federation, that even all of them are being used, it will be enough only for 1 year of these of the support to Ukraine. We need to think not only about accumulated assets that have been taken from Russia, but about flows that would continue every year. Last year, this year, next year, the year after the next, as long as it takes. Because this war is not going to end anytime soon, and nobody knows how long this war would continue. And those military support would be needed for Ukraine and for partners of Ukraine for all those years. So that is why we need to think about the mechanism, how to support Ukraine not only once, but forever. Also including not only budgets of countries that are partners of Ukraine right now. That's good, and thanks a lot to the help from European and American partners of Ukraine. But we need to think how to use resources of aggressor to help Ukraine. And that is why we need to think about not only seizing and using assets of Russian Federation, which is we already touch upon, but we need to think how to use export proceeds of the Russian Federation, how to redirect them in order to use them to support defense and economic efforts of Ukraine. So that is why the idea of smart sanctions, sanctions that would use part of the export proceeds from the Russian Federation to send them to Ukraine. It would not disrupt international trade. It would not remove oil or any other energy from the world market that would make some problem, would create some problems for the world economy, but would use proceeds from those exports for support of Ukraine.
Okay, I couldn't agree more. But it's fourth year to the big war in Europe, and in the beginning, well, lots of Ukrainians, they are brave soldiers, they are civil persons were alive, and their country was not being half destroyed as it I'm afraid is now. So at those points of decision, the West was more or less united. Even if they chickened out, they did it in a coordinated way, I would say, because why would NATO General Secretary used the same words as German Chancellor and French President, that we are definitely not going to be part of the war. Why say this thing, even if you have this in mind? This would have been projecting sustainability. I would like to ask you, do you remember by chance, Andrei, there was a big, not military crisis in Europe after the big economic collapse of the Lehman Brothers. There was a economical crisis, and everybody was afraid that we cannot pay our leasings, and the state budgets will be blown up. How much did European Union, their central banks and their governments, get help from international, but mainly European-owned central bank? How many euros? If you don't have this number by heart, you shouldn't. It was 4.3 trillions at once. Some of them share money, extended lending lines, credit lines, and some of them as guarantees, which Ukraine very much missed in the first year. If there would have been guarantees, long tranche of Lend-Lease, plus the Russian reserves, they would have been in a super good situation as opposed to what they have now. So that's a real shame, really. But the West is the best which we have. I mean, I don't remember in Soviet times, we were born in the same year, 1961, where we're not, Andrei. We had we were studying English, of course, and that was a saying, East or West, home or best, but I'm modifying it, East or West, West is best, as an Estonian. So I would like now I would like to ask you to elaborate on what could have happened prior to the war, which caused the chickening out of the Western governments. And you have been pointing out that something happened during the very unusual diplomatic move when Bill Burns, the head of the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States, made a visit to Moscow. Not any senior diplomat, not the vice president, but Bill Burns, the director of the CIA. And before you let us hear your assumptions, what could have happened there, I have been elaborating on it and looking, I mean, for two quotes. One was the very queer and unexpected quote by President Joe Biden when he said that if Russia is going to commit to a smaller violation of the border, of smaller aggression, maybe U.S. doesn't see a cause to interfere. And the second is when Dmitry Peskov, the PR leader of Kremlin, gave his comment on the visit of CIA Director Bill Burns, he said that Mr. Putin and the director of CIA were addressing the bilateral relations, the crisis situation in the diplomatic practice, and they exchanged views on regional conflicts. So maybe Moscow deceived. They performed a nice deception on Bill Burns to give a sign that there could be something looking like an attack on Ukraine, but it's not going to be anything serious. What happened in November, by the way, 2021, during this visit in Moscow?
Hans, may I use your question just to put more information for our conversation in this regard? What happened even before this visit by Mr. Burns to Moscow? On the week of October 15th, CIA and US intelligence had in their possession, as they claimed later, information according to which Putin was going to attack Ukraine with large-scale war. We had a wonderful book by John Sullivan, don't mix with Jake Sullivan, John Sullivan.
The ambassador to Moscow, you mean?
Correct, yes.
yourself. I have read it, yes.
Yes, it's a great book, and I strongly recommend everyone who is interested in the war and the preparation to the war to look into this book. He explained that in this week of October 15th, he had been invited to the intelligence community establishment in the United States and had briefing, according to which he received enormous information that, according to him, was an absolute proof that Putin is going to attack Ukraine with full-scale war. After which, approximately a week or maybe 10 days later, on October 27th, the White House had a closed meeting of the Security Council of the United States with participation of the President, Vice President, Director of CIA, Head of Pentagon, Head of State Department, everybody, at which the Security Council of the United States discussed exactly this particular issue. The preparations of Putin to attack Ukraine with full-scale, large-scale war. As a result of these conversations, according to Mr. Burns, who was an active participant of this meeting, President Biden has sent Mr. Burns to Moscow. And now the question, with what? Mr. Burns not once, but dozens of times described this visit. The only thing that he discussed many details, and Mr. Sullivan also, who was participating in that visit and describing this visit as well, many interesting and important details. What is missing? What was the purpose of this visit? Just let's think about the American government. They receive information that aggressor is going to attack independent country. And according to Burns, and according to some other sources, that was absolutely clear. There was no doubt that they're going to attack. What must be done by this country who got this information? First, certainly, to provide this all information to potential victim of aggression, to Ukraine. As we have learned later, as Mr. Zelensky and all people from the Ukrainian government said not once, they did not receive this information. And what has been published in newspapers, so-called leaks, they just don't trust this information because it's not the way how this very sensitive information can be transferred to Ukraine. And Zelensky said not once that up to February 24th, they did not receive this information. Moreover, this information has not been received by European partners and allies of the United States. They did not share this information. They shared conclusions, but not the facts.
Okay, Andrei, what the top panelist of CIA later told me in an interview was that the CIA and diplomats, they personally made visits to their colleagues, like the Bundesnachrichtendienst, the German intelligence, and the others, to give some details. For instance, the three directions of attack: Kherson, Belarus, and the east of Ukraine, and also about there already being in Kiev some sabotage teams of Russian GRU in order to arrest or even shoot somebody. So some information was being forwarded, but the Westerners, the Europeans, didn't believe it because they had the very murky experience of the information of mass weapons in mass destruction weapons in Iraq. There were some details, but not all.
Yeah, that's true. And except it looks like most of Western intelligence services did not trust this information, and Ukrainians did not trust this information as well. And the question, why they did not trust? Because what rest has been done by the American administration. They did not do anything that would be confirmation that they have this information. Because if the United States, according to the President of the United States, Joe Biden, or Director of CIA Burns, knew about those preparations, they would do something to prevent this aggression, to deter Putin from this aggression. What has been done by US administration was exactly opposite. They withdrew all American assets from Ukraine. They asked all American citizens to leave Ukraine. They withdrew US Navy from the Black Sea. They stopped to share some military information with Ukrainians. Moreover, you just mentioned about that if there will be minor incursion, it will be not incursion. So what has been done by the US administration was exactly demonstrating that they themselves either do not trust this intelligence information, or they are trying to lure Putin into Ukraine. So that is why this mistrust of Ukrainians and Europeans are understandable, because the real behavior of US administration was quite different from what must be expected in such a situation. Moreover, if the US administration has received this information, so what should be expected from them? They would put more military support to Ukraine in terms of delivery of military aid. And Mr. Zelensky was asking for this military aid, and it has not been provided. Moreover, it would be very easy, and we have discussed it just prior to that, in the last months of 21 and early months of 22, including at the Munich Conference on Security, just send American troops into Ukraine when there is no large-scale war. And those troops would not participate in this war, but they will be located there. They will be deployed there. The physical presence of American troops in Ukraine, and I will mention exact position of this potential US brigade on the Ukrainian soil in Novaya Kakhovka, just on the
dam, where the big dam was being exploded.
Exactly, just on the direction of the main thrust of the Russian troops towards Dnieper. And it's not a guarantee, but there was suggestion that it could cool down substantially intentions of Putin to attack Ukraine, because in that particular case, he would be dealing not only with Ukrainians, but with Americans. That was the same logic to deploy NATO troops into Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania after the invasion into Crimea. And those troops have been deployed in year 2015. And at least so far, for the last 10 years, they were able to deter attacks and aggressions of Russian Federation against Baltic countries. So the idea was to repeat the same approach in case of Ukraine. What has been done by American administration, they did exactly opposite. So that is why this visit, and by the way, Mr. Burns, not once, but once again, dozens of times, when he described his visit to Kremlin, his conversations with people close to Putin and to Putin himself, that he said that he returned from Moscow even more convinced that Putin is going to attack Ukraine. Okay. And he said that he immediately brought this information to President of the United States and to all American leadership. So it means if Burns returned from Moscow even more convinced that Putin is going to attack Ukraine, the immediate question would come, what American administration and what Mr. Burns personally have done to deter this aggression, to prevent this war from unfolding. And we found that what has been done by US administration was exactly to invite Putin troops into Ukraine, not to defend Ukraine.
That's a very detailed and hefty accusation, I would say, and most probably truthful. Just to add one detail, in his book, the American ambassador to Moscow, who was accompanying Mr. Burns during his visit, also probably participating in the telephone call with Vladimir Putin, because reportedly President Putin was not in Moscow at this point of time, which is a strange thing to do if the CIA director is visiting your country, but also a sign. What the ambassador writes in his memoirs is that they were actually with Mr. Primakov, they were sitting down and looking at the draft of this outright stupid ultimatum to NATO countries that they should draw their presence off from the Baltic states and Poland, Eastern Europe, just to the pre-1997 frontiers. And this is what they discussed. I would like to find ways to explain what happened with the Western coalition before and immediately after the war. And I was thinking about a famous slogan in France in the year 1939. France, of course, had been participating in the First World War, in the terrible killing on the front lines, and the quotation went like that: "Pourquoi mourir pour dancing?" Why die for dancing, for the city of dancing, or Gdansk, as the Polish put it right now. So we see two nations who were totally humiliated and lost lots of their manpower in the two world wars, Germany and France. So they would avoid instinctively to fulfill any promises of follow any coalitions to defend dancing in the case of 39 or Poland in the modern case. What happens to Europe? I would like to bring another example of the 9th to 10th September attacks this year to Polish territory by the way, 21 drones, as Polish Foreign Minister Sikorski told Delfi recently in Kiev. The 21 drones, they brought such a psychical reaction to our countries here near the Baltic Sea that we were expecting something happens, like a declaration is being issued that now Poland and Romania will cover Ukraine territory from the western side of Ukraine in order not to let those incidents occur again. And then I noticed, probably you did the same, that the NATO General Secretary Mark Rutte, alongside with the Polish NATO General, didn't answer a very direct question. Did the United States European-based forces help to deter the aggression? Did they provide information or help in order to follow and shoot down the drones, or be prepared what could be coming after the drone wave? Could be Iskander or other type of missiles. And Rutte said nothing. He just ignored the question. And one more thing which came to my mind at this point. There were two prime ministers who sabotaged the almost unanimous plan of the European Union to issue euro bonds for increasing of defense spending last year, in the year 2024. Those countries were not Hungary, no Slovakia. Those countries were Germany under Olaf Scholz and Holland after Mark Rutte. which shamefully told that the balance of state budget is a much more important thing than gaining a real serious sum of bond money for defense. So the Europeans, we here, as you're at another continent right now, how do you explain this inability to form a serious, trustworthy reaction?
First, I would come back to this visit of Mr. Burns to Moscow. When he was in Kremlin speaking over phone to Putin, he was alone, meaning there was nobody from the American state or American delegation, American embassy, who would accompany him into Kremlin. Ambassador Sullivan has put it very elegantly in his book, explaining that Russian side said that he is unwelcome to Kremlin during Mr. Burns' conversation with Mr. Putin. So Mr. Burns went there without any interpreter, without any assistant, without any person who would written down the note taker. So that is why essentially there is no official record, there is no transcript on the American side what has been discussed. It comes back to the question that I put earlier on, saying that what was the task put either by Mr. Biden personally or by somebody else or by Burns.
Andrei, would you like to be more outspoken? Where are you heading, Andrei? Why won't
I'm saying that we don't know what was the purpose of Mr. Burns to Moscow, and we don't know what was the subject of discussion between Mr. Burns and Putin. After which, according to the data collected by the Ukrainian military intelligence, only after that it has been recorded accumulation of Russian military forces against Ukraine, not before. If you look into the article written and published by the head of GUR in November, late November 21, in Military Times, US military newspaper, you would easily
Mr. Budanov, I mean.
Mr. Budanov. If I'm not mistaken, the article has been published on November 22nd, 2021. You could
We will find the article and we will install slides here, no problem.
Correct, yes. You would see clearly that in October 21, there was a substantial decline of Russian forces deployed along Russian-Ukrainian line of contact. And
Why was that?
Sorry?
Why was that? Was it because the military exercise from Russian side, or why was
the Russian military exercise with Belarus was in September. In October, it was a substantial decline of Russian forces deployed along the Russian-Ukrainian both border and line of contact in Donbass. And the increase of Russian troops deployed against Ukraine started only after Burns' visit to Moscow, purpose of which is unknown. The content of his conversation with Putin is unknown. This is the facts. I abstain from interpretation. I'm just putting these facts for thinking what did really happen. And there is no, so far, and I was following these events, nobody was able to explain what kind of information, intelligence information, suddenly became known to US government, to CIA, in the mid of October, that they made this conclusion that Putin is going to attack Ukraine. Mr. Sullivan, the Ambassador Sullivan, has explained in his book that until this meeting in the intelligence community, he has not seen any single case, not single fact, confirming that Putin is going to attack Ukraine with full-scale invasion. And everybody who is dealing with military intelligence knows that any intelligence, including military intelligence, is not such that all of a sudden you have all picture. No, this is a collection of information, piece by piece, detail by detail, sometimes confirming, sometimes contradicting, sometimes unclear. And this is a process of accumulation of information that needs to be checked and tested. And it is not possible to just, even based on the fact that there is some movement of troops, all of a sudden to make a conclusion, okay, Putin is going to attack Ukraine. It is impossible to do it like this. So that is why there's still mystery about what has happened in October and November 21, and why all of a sudden, without any clear confirmation of this preparation, Mrs. Victoria Nuland has visited Moscow from 10th or 11th of October for 3 days. And she had...
it was November, don't you think it was November?
No, October.
I'll check it out, okay.
She traveled to Moscow 3 weeks before Mr. Burns, and she had a number of conversations with Russian leadership. And Mrs. Nuland did not detect any preparations for anything. And it was an attempt, actually, it was a kind of the positive development, reasonably positive development in bilateral relations between United States and Russia. So once again, I'm just saying that there is a lot of mystery about the so-called intelligence information that Mr. Burns was using so widely and so much bragging about over the last 3 or now 4 years. But we still don't know what has happened back then. Now, coming back to your question about the solidarity and the unity of Europeans. There are many reasons might be used, starting from the social cohesion of particular society, or budget situation in a particular country, or the lack of military expenditures, or readiness, not full readiness, partial readiness to substantial military engagement with Russia directly or via Ukraine. It is understandable. But now it is almost 4 years of large-scale war. Large-scale war waged against not only Ukraine, but against Europe. And it is 11 years of conventional war that has been launched in year 2014 with occupation and annexation of Crimea, with occupation of substantial portion of Ukraine in southeast in Donbass. Nobody could argue that Putin would stop back then. It was absolutely clear after aggression against Georgia, after aggression and after operations in Syria, after all endless statements of Putin, after Crimea and Donbass, it was absolutely clear there will be next step. And that step was genuinely anticipated, not in particular time, in particular place, but genuinely anticipated. Now, once again, it is almost 4 years of this large-scale war. So that is why this is a decision that must be taken or must not be taken by European leaders. If it is not taken, it means, regardless what explanation would be, and lack of desire or lack of readiness to save themselves, not only to defend Ukraine, but save themselves. One of the preliminary conclusions for such a situation is the death of NATO. It is very painful, but it's necessary to state. NATO in the current state is not viable project.
Really?
It was a good alliance. That alliance did help to keep a relative peace in Europe for almost 80 years. But now this alliance cannot fulfill the tasks that for which it has been created. You mentioned already these couple of countries that do not participate in general activities of other NATO countries, and leaders of those countries went to China to participate in summit of Shanghai Security Organization, which essentially understood as alternative to NATO, and actually to some extent, adversary to NATO. So, and two countries, Hungary and Slovakia, and Turkey. So that is why altogether 3 countries from NATO travel to the adversary to NATO. We have a new administration, already not so much new administration in the United States, that has very clearly stated that the United States is not going to participate in the defense of Europe. And even this case of Polish of the drone attack on Poland territory and also on Romanian territory, and one drone on Lithuanian territory, just demonstrated that the United States is not ready, under the current leadership, is not going to participate in the collective defense of Europe. Not Ukraine, but NATO Europe. You mentioned a couple of cases of countries that do not participate in collective economic/financial method actions in defense of Europe. So it is time to create and actually to grow up the real defense alliance of those European countries that are ready to defend themselves collectively, and maybe not only NATO countries. And I mean Ukraine, that has largest, strongest, the most effective, and the most battle-proven army on the European continent right now. What form, what shape this particular alliance will take, nobody knows. But we can think about a number of countries that, to my understanding, is much more ready for such efforts. Among them would be definitely Ukraine #1, Poland, Baltic countries, Scandinavian countries, Britain. And thinking about that, we need to come back to history at least of the last 5 centuries. We have many cases when forces from the East, let's put it such way, because there were different countries, different regimes, different political regimes, different government systems, were trying to attack Europe, Western neighbors. In many cases, forces of the East won and took territories and took people and enslaved many of them and killed many of them. But not all those cases were successful for the Eastern aggressor. And we need to study those cases when it was not a victory for the Eastern aggressor, but was a defeat.
Like the miracle on Wisla in the year 1920, when Trotsky's forces wanted to go to join their communist brothers in Bavaria and Berlin. What do you say about the Livonian War? The situation, the weakness of Europe as I see it, and probably NATO without the United States, reminds me about the self-sufficiency of German order, the Deutsche Ordnung, which we had to protect us in the mid-16th century when Ivan the Terrible attacked us. But they were just running away. They were good for nothing, the German order. It was an old, worn-out order, enjoying themselves and their feudal, lands, the richness of the lands. They were just celebrating themselves. Self-congratulatory activities. Does it remind you of the Livonian War, the beginning of it? Not before the Swedes arrived. By the way, if Donald Trump of second cadence would have been president, and Finland especially, but also Sweden, would have been applied for NATO membership, I don't think he would have been letting Finland in as a bordering country to Russia. I don't think so.
Yeah, we can discuss this particular sensitive issue. But let me come back to the examples that you've mentioned. The Polish victory on Vistula, this miracle on Vistula in 1920, was the result of relatively short mobile war, Soviet-Polish War, 1919 to 1921, but essentially it was the military operations of 1 year, yet 1920. There was another example that maybe not generally considered as a victory, but just with the historical background which we have right now, the Soviet-Finnish War of 1939-1940, and the war continuation of 1941 to 1944 did not allow Soviet troops to conquer all Finland. Finland has lost some part of territories, and President Stubb has reminded the world about these particular stories. But Finland was able to save its independence and to survive. From the point of view of Stalin's plans, it was, I would say that it was a victory on Finland, because Finns did not allow Stalin to fulfill this plan. Those two examples are very important to understand the military situation, but probably they are not very good in applying to long-term so-called 100 years approach or secular approach that we need to take into account when we are talking about the Russian-Ukrainian war or Russian war against Europe. Unlike those cases, this war is not short-term war. This is a long-term war. This is a war that is not going to stop and end anytime soon. So that is why we are forced to find out in the history of this particular part of Europe something that resembles the current situation. And here, you're absolutely right. The best example is Livonian War, which lasted almost a quarter of century. During the first part, actually the first two parts of the Livonian War, the troops of Ivan the Terrible were successful. The troops of Ivan the Terrible were able to conquer Estland and Livland, the all Baltic territories that became now Baltic countries.
Sorry to interfere, Andrei. Do you know that in the course of the military activities, where Tallinn didn't give in, our guys with the Germans killed Malyuta Skuratov, the sadistic head of the opposition. We're so happy. It happened some 40 kilometers from Tallinn in Paide. Go ahead, please.
Thank you for this contribution to the kind of slight humanization of the Russian statehood with elimination of this person. So, during these first stages of Livonian War, almost all territory of the current Estonia and Latvia has been captured, with exception of Tallinn and Riga. So, because of the collapse of the Teutonic Order on this territory, Lithuanian Principality, the Grand Principality of Lithuania, joined the war on the part of Livonia. And because the balance of power was still not in favor of these participants, Livonia and Lithuania, troops of Ivan the Terrible were still successful, and they captured Polotsk. Back then, it was probably the largest city in Lithuania, and the largest, richest, very populated, and so on. And Ivan the Terrible was successful for almost 2 decades in this war, until there was a substantial, I would say, radical change in the balance of power and balance of military power and balance of economic power and balance of demographic power. Lithuanians concluded the Lublin Union and joined resources with Kingdom of Poland. This is the first step. And second step, Poles and Lithuanians elected Stefan Batory. And this is a genius, absolutely outstanding statesman, was able to do something that this part of the world, of Europe, did not see before. He was able to unite resources of territories and nations and societies that we can count as, according to the modern way, like Poland, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, Latvia, Estonia, with substantial contribution from volunteers from Transylvania, which we would call Romania, from Hungary, from Germany, from Sweden, from Finland. And such an alliance, such a coalition, real coalition of the willing, with substantial support, economic, military support, and under the guidance of the outstanding statesman and military leader like Stefan Batory, was able to inflict one by one defeats to the troops of Ivan the Terrible. And they were able to liberate Polotsk. They were able to liberate all Livonia, meaning all Livland and Estland, Latvia and Estonia in modern days. And they were able even to attack the territory of aggressor, to besiege Pskov and force Ivan the Terrible to conclude the peace treaty, which not only restore internationally recognized border existed before this war, but even to take some part of the Russian territories just as a guarantee against new aggressions. And the result of this victory in the Livonian War was such that for the next 50 or 60 years, the aggressor from the East never tried to challenge the territorial integrity of its Western neighbors. So the main lesson that can we draw, and we must draw from the experience of the Livonian War, that victory on the Eastern Front is still possible, restoration of internationally recognized borders still possible, and the security guarantees for Ukraine and other countries of Eastern Front are still possible. But the main condition for that is alliance, military alliance of all those countries and territories and societies. And we know
alliance.
Alliance.
A new alliance.
New alliance.
Well, that's
under the leadership of new modern Stefan Batory. Because only such a person with such a grand stature and with long long-term understanding and ability and character can unite those resources, those nations, those countries, and to create a new military alliance. And
Do you have
that
somebody?
is,
Do you have somebody in mind in present day Europe, Eastern Europe?
so far we don't see any candidate for that. I saw a number of candidates, but they are not active, either diplomat or politicians. But with arrival such a person, if such person would appear on political horizon of this part of Europe, there is a opening for such creation such alliance and for next step military operations with potential military victory over the aggressor. This is the only way to not only to restore the order, but to save all those countries from incredibly high risk of aggression against them.
Well, you are giving us a very good assessment of the situation, however disappointing it was at the beginning of the war. At least there seems to be a strategic way out, a new Eastern European Bismarck, should I say. Just before I make one short comment and ask my last question to you, the comment is that the Muscovite maniac was also being weakened by a nation from the district of the Black Sea. The Crimean Khans started a war with Ivan the Terrible. And it was so unexpected, just as in the very beginning, I think Turkey saved Ukraine from the worst by closing the Dardanelles Straits, both for Russian Navy and for NATO Navy. This was a strong move, especially keeping in mind what President Sarkozy of France wanted to do, namely to produce two military naval landing vessels, to the Mistrals, to Russia, which was an outright idiotic idea, should I say. My last question, to which you could, as an analyst, probably find a quite short answer, is that our hope and some people's hope up to today is that economic sanctions, I mean, draining Russian resources, screwing the sanctions, would somehow help the Russians to rethink and stop the war. Has it in any time in military history happened that economic measures stop the war?
We know the answer to your question. And just to check our own understanding, we ask even artificial intelligence about that.
Did you?
History does not know the case in which, during the real war, conventional war, that is already going for some time, that only economic measures, including sanctions, would stop the war or would end the war with anything similar, not even with victory, but just with the fixation of the line of contact. Not a single case. All wars were won by military force, by military strength, by troops, by equipment, by material, military, by resources. Only by military force. There is no other way to do it. So that is why something happened in the Western minds in February 22, when they all of a sudden decided that it's possible to fight and even win the war by using only economic tools. Not a single case in the history of humanity.
Well, analyst from Washington, Andrei Illarionov, thank you indeed for this thorough analysis. Thank you for our conversation, and I wish you would have time in the future to devote your new strategic ideas. Meanwhile, I wish we would accomplish what you proposed in our stream. Thank you very much, Andrei.
Thank you very much, Hans. All the best.
All the best.